So again, we're here for the grant writing and preparing a project pipeline training. To kick us off, we have our main lesson question for today is, how do I write compelling grant applications and structure a strong project pipeline? Our learning objectives are learning how to build a pipeline of priority projects with engaged partners that position your community for success in applying for grants. We want to create a community-specific toolbox of grant-ready content for your community, your commitment to clean energy, your partners, and to allow for rapid response to opportunities. Evaluate eligibility and competitiveness for grant opportunities, and understand the magic formula for writing winning grant applications. So only one poll question for you this morning. Would love to understand your level of agreement with this question. Let me launch the poll. So, to what extent do you agree with this statement? I am confident in pursuing grants for energy efficiency and other clean energy projects. Sorry, that's the wrong poll. Apologies. There we go. Just take 20 more seconds to answer the question if you haven't yet. And welcome to those who've just joined. We've just kicked off and we're doing our introductory polling question. So to what extent do you agree with this statement? Take 10 more seconds and then we'll wrap up the poll and jump in. Okay. So we've got a lot of neutral, actually a very beautiful bell graph, lots of neutral, some agrees, a couple strongly disagrees and disagree. So hopefully after this training, you can feel a lot more confident. Great. I am going to pass it over now to Naomi and Melissa to introduce themselves.
Great. Naomi, did you want to start?
Sure. I'm wondering if we could just have, it's so funny because you're being shown, but I'm talking. So maybe we could just have is there a way for me to be? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Here's the thing I want to say to you about me and Melissa, is that our fuller biographies are in the workbook that you received when you got the confirmation last Friday. And right now, Shamika is putting a link to that workbook into the chat. And what I want you to do while I'm talking about myself is go to that link and download that workbook, because what we're going to end up doing today, one, you can learn all about me and Melissa in the introduction to that workbook, but everything that we do today, we're going to go through it and it's going to make total sense as we're going through it. And then you're going to go practice it. And in the book is detail. You will be able to revisit and practice. And so I really want you to get your hands on that. So I have been doing strategy work and evaluation and facilitation work for 30 or 40 years. I can't even count anymore. Melissa has been with me for half of that time. I do most of my work since 2010 has been climate related and energy related. Melissa brings a deep knowledge of training, actually, and also of schools. The two big pieces of her career before she was with me were those two elements. She was a professional trainer, and then she spent, was it 10 years, Melissa, in the school system here?
14 years, yep.
14 years. Ay. All right. So we feel like we have and we have for the past 5 years really been writing a lot of energy related grants for municipalities. With that, I'm wondering if Julia, you want to show that, if you want to take over again and show them where this is on the website.
Definitely. Let me do that. And also, I noticed from some folks that you actually don't have access to that document. It is in your email from Samiksha on Friday, but let me show you where it's going to live after this training. So this is our training curriculum and resources website. A lot of love went into it, so make sure you're familiar with all of the details of it. Under grant writing and preparing a project pipeline, this is today's training. It'll live under lesson resources along with the recording and the slides. So moving forward, this is where you can always access it.
All right. So have most of you been able to go back and look at that email and see if you have it as an attachment? Just want to make sure. It's the best part of the whole training is the workbook, so I don't want you to miss it. Yes. All right. I'm seeing some thumbs up. All right. Terrific. We'll get back to the business um, of training. So we've broken this out in sort of 10-minute increments with at 11:30, after I run through a bunch of things, we're actually going to have some hands-on time in really looking at an existing grant opportunity, well, a past grant opportunity that may be a future grant opportunity for many of you. So we'll have some hands-on and then we'll close up, and then we have a good chunk of time for questions and answers at the end, which is all to say that I'm probably not going to take, unless I have said something hugely confusing, and then you should just write with alarm into the chat and somebody will stop me. But I'm not going to take questions while I go through the first part of the training until we get up to the evaluating a grant opportunity. I hope that's okay with everybody. So we move forward here to the next slide. So I'm starting with the thing I don't want. This is probably one of the biggest takeaways I want you to have from today's training, which is do not follow the money. Do not start by finding a grant opportunity and building a project to fit it, because what will happen is this. You will be nuts and you will not end up, some of you have probably already had this experience, but you'll be up against a clock. You will, if you're lucky enough to actually meet everything and get it in, you may end up with a grant that you don't actually want to do because it wasn't a project that was a priority for you or that really met the needs of your community. So if there's nothing else you learned today, I want you to remember, you do not build a project to meet a grant. That's my number one rule. What we're going to go through today is it's going to feel somewhat linear, partly because that's how I think, and partly because you have to have a framework and you have to start somewhere, but it's not a linear process. Being really effective at being a grant winner is really a constant virtuous cycle. And each of you are starting at a different level. Some of you, as we saw about 60% of you were neutral or negative on your confidence level, right? That says to me 40% of you have some confidence here, right? Which means you're probably been through this cycle at least once. So you're each starting in a different place. You're going to keep going through this cycle over and over. And you're not always going to start where I'm going to start, which is like, how do you start your pipeline priorities? Sometimes a grant will drop and it looks so good for an opportunity you've been trying to figure out how to fund that you're going to start with that grant evaluation and grant game plan, right? And sometimes you're going to be able to start, which many of you already have, with the partners. Like you're going to be in conversations and something's going to evolve from that. So just to say, you're going to start where you start, but to think of this as a continuous process. And even when you submit your first grant, you're going right back to building that pipeline of priority projects, building the partners, just you keep going around this circle. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish today, and recognize that it will be ongoing. Next slide. So the first, figuring out, just as I said, don't build a project for a grant. This is the opposite end of this. This is the most important thing you can do is to figure out what the high priority projects are in your community. And two of the best places to find that out are your community's comprehensive plan or other planning documents. And many of you, if you're in smaller towns, you may not have a comprehensive plan. That's possible. You may have other plans, or you may have, yeah. And then the other really great place is the comprehensive plans and other planning documents like your municipal vulnerability planning document or your climate plan, any of those tend to speak at a high level about the community's priority. And they tend to have really good data in them. Somebody spent some time pulling together information, and it's conceptually generally high level with priorities. The capital plan is a marvelous document if you have it. And again, some of you may not have capital plans that are, 5-year capital plans. All of you will have annual budgets. There's no municipality that isn't running with at least an annual budget, and somewhere in that annual budget will be capital. But the wonderful thing about capital plans, and why I really advocate for folks to get familiar both with the capital plan and the capital planning process, is because that is really where the rubber meets the road of what your community has prioritized spending the money on, spending municipal taxpayer dollars or bonding money on, which is taxpayer dollars. But so those are really important. And I'm going to show you next slide some of what you may find when you go and look at a plan. We pulled up Lynn's plan, and sure enough, the summary, even just right on the summary page where it talks about the priorities, one of the highest priorities is build high quality educational facilities for our students. This is very powerful when we're looking at grants. To be able to say our community's comprehensive plan, our top 5 priorities, this is the top. So, and also, as you can see, even from this page that we pulled out, like there's this beautiful map all through this document is all sorts of information about Lynn, well written. It's been gone through a million times. And there are graphics that are usable. So these plans can be just incredibly powerful to give you that base information and also to tell you something about the community. The next slide I want to show you is we pulled from the Revere capital plan. Now, in your workbook, we have some directions on like how do you find these plans and sort of navigate through. But I just pulled forward here some of what we saw and what you might find when you look at your capital plan. We found 2 really interesting things. One was that this community has a huge allocation and a lot of grants for this renovation they're doing of the McKinley School. So they already have several million dollars, about $25 million in grant funding to create an early childhood education center that has a food hub and that is also their emergency call center. And later in the program, I'm going to be talking a little bit about what makes something a critical facility and why you want to know which those are, and that may be relevant for grants. But here, what you also know is there's already $25 million on the table. So this is a project where you as an energy manager may want to be talking to people about what you might be able to bring to that project, because there's already a lot of money going in and it's a priority of the city. And maybe you can get some energy activity going on. Maybe you can get them even better energy upgrades in that building with your access and knowledge. The other thing we pulled out is that we see that they're participating in the MSBA Accelerated Repair Program, and they've allocated an earmark for new boilers and new windows and doors. So this again tells you that while they're getting some money from MSBA, there's a planned expenditure here. And that may be another opportunity for you to see this as a priority, and it's happening fast. Is there a way for you to get in the middle of that project in a positive way? But now from these 2 documents, and obviously for your own community, you can very quickly find out that there's some projects that are a priority for your community. Next slide. So the other thing that there are a couple other areas that are good ways to think about what a priority would be. I have not yet met a community in which the high energy, high cost buildings are not something that starts a conversation. And I love starting grants with, this is our highest energy use building in the city. So I think most of you now in this program have probably learned to use MEI. MEI has this wonderful report, which will tell you your highest use buildings. And I think you can have the report come in a different way, and it'll tell you the cost. What MEI can't tell you, which you can only really learn from getting close to, and we're going to talk more about, and I know many of you have started the process of meeting your internal partners within the city and your utilities, is which buildings have problems, like which buildings, like the boiler may work, but the maintenance guys are there keeping it together with spit and paste, um, sometimes they'll know which are at end of life. Not necessarily everybody knows that. Like the folks who actually manage these buildings have a lot more information. Folks in the school will know, did they have to close school early in June or not be able to start because the building was just too hot? Like that kind of information you can't actually get from MEI. You got to get that from real people, but it's super important to get those stories when you're going around and talking to your colleagues. Super important to the extent that you can get the information about end of life equipment, because end of life equipment really says, when you're having conversations with the folks who understand the money flows, right, is it's going to go at some point and it's going to go soon and there's going to be a big expense. So that can make it higher on the list for looking for ways to replace that and get some extra funding in, because otherwise the full hit's going to happen for your community. Another area I want you to be thinking about as you're going around and talking to colleagues is what buildings are critical facilities. So as you saw in that example from Revere, they have a building that's both going to be a child care center, and children and elderly special populations can mean that it's a critical facility, but it's also an emergency response center. So those buildings can be sort of more important. They have to operate. So buildings that are used as heating and cooling sites, as shelters, those are things that, again, unfortunately, I can't give you a link to Google critical facilities. Like you're going to learn that in your conversations with people. But this is how you figure out how to rank your buildings and your projects and begin that process of saying, where am I with this project? I've got a building with a boiler that's going to go. What's the scope here? How can I get this building ready to go? So this is your pipeline: is what's the community priority? What are your partners in the city's priorities, which don't always match yours? Where are their critical facilities? This is all beginning to help you prioritize the facilities investments and energy investment possibilities and what your top projects are going to be. Next slide. So this is one of those iterative things. So when we started talking at the very first kickoff meeting for MESM, and I know we've had new energy managers join us, but I think the biggest takeaway from that day for me was just how important it is to meet the folks in your community. And for grant writing, these relationships need to be in place. You can't build these relationships when the grant drops, right? So, some of the big ones, and in your workbook, we walk through a lot of these and talk about, why you need to know them. Obviously, the school superintendent is hugely important, especially if a lot of your buildings that use energy are school buildings, right? And that whole connection to the school infrastructure, to the academic program there. And again, it takes time to build that relationship. We've found that starting the relationship actually with the facilities and building staff, whether in the school department or across your city, really getting to know the folks whose hands are dirty in running these buildings is so, so important as a starting place to learn a lot of those things we talked about that you can't find out from your comprehensive plan. But also because if those guys are with you and you really understand their problems, and I'm using guys generically, women, men, all of them, the folks whose hands are touching those buildings, they know a lot. The people who have to be in those buildings know a lot. And that's going to enrich the conversations you have with the school superintendent and other personnel. Often we find there isn't a facilities department in a town, especially smaller towns. Often your Department of Public Works both have a lot of buildings and facilities responsibility. It's getting to know them. Your mayor's office and whoever's in charge of budget office, I would say, one, you need to understand that budget process and you need friends and relations over there, right? But also when you're going for a grant, you need to know how you get to the person who gets to sign off on whether or not you can submit that grant. So you want to be building those relationships early, and so that you're not, when you need a signature from the town manager or the mayor, or you want an okay, you know who it is you need to go to. You know who it is you need to go to get an appointment. And again, sometimes in your smaller towns you can walk right in the door. Sometimes in the bigger towns there's such a long process that you need a friend. So there's that. If you are really, really lucky and live in a community where there are grant writers, find out where they are and how they get assigned to things. Even if you don't end up being able to use them, they will have resources already ready, stock text and stuff. So you definitely want to connect with them. They may also have the keys to submitting grants, like federal grants. Often there's one person in a city who has sort of the keys to the submitting process for federal grants. So you do want to find that team if you're lucky enough for it to exist in your community. And I can't overstate the value of knowing the folks on your Mass Save team, especially in almost every application that's for an energy saving grant that we've gone through. There have been resources that those utility team members have been able to help us pull together and think through to make it stronger. I'd also say that we've seen over and over, especially if you're a very new energy manager and you're coming into a community that hasn't had an energy manager before, but has had some connection to the Mass Save team, that they can often be a really good, warm, welcome handshake over to some of the folks who are operating in these buildings who they've worked with before. So that can be really helpful. So again, all of these internal partners who are in black on this screen are folks that you should be starting those relationships now, and you should be starting as a listener. Find out what their concerns are. We have some worksheets in the workbook about like asking those questions about critical facilities and things, but right now the most important thing is to build those trusting relationships, be a listener, figure out what you can do. The other thing I would say in that vein is that we found that, and we heard at the earlier training, that one of the things that can really build those relationships are some of the Mass Save tools that they have for you. So for instance, a lot of the facilities guys, when they learn that they can have a free, a no cost assessment by a vendor to help identify some problems and give them some basic pricing on things, and that there's a very easy path to pursue that in terms of acquisitions, like that can be a huge value that they didn't know they had access to. And then, lighting isn't going to be here forever, but it's here this year. And those lighting projects have such a powerful payback for folks and such a value to the schools and to others, that is often a huge, sort of relationship building offer. Steam traps, if you still have steam buildings, a steam trap survey. So there's some things that your Mass Save partners have that when you're listening, if you're listening for it, you might have something that you can offer right away that helps to build that relationship. So just wanted to mention that. So these other partners, the community partners that I have listed on this, one of the things when you're making your internal partnerships, you should be asking those internal partners, who are their existing community partners? Who is already in the loop and there's already a relationship? And you want to start building relationships with those community partners to the extent that like you really want to do this in tandem with those other internal partners, and be sensitive to those relationships, and that you're following protocol. But you always want to start with who's already in and working with the partners that you need to be working with. Next slide. Almost all grants that you're going to apply for, somewhere in there they will ask about or mention or prioritize community and community engagement or stakeholder engagement. And one of the things to be careful about is I think sometimes we hear community engagement or stakeholder engagement, we think of a whole big process. First of all, grants are often very specific about which stakeholders they're trying to reach. And so you need to be like careful about that. And so if it's a school grant, they may be talking about the K-12 students and teachers as the stakeholders or as the community, not the broader community. Sometimes they're talking about more than that. But just to know, this is the list of, like, we have seen grants that are targeted at these specific, this is the most likely set of stakeholders. And I also want to just go back to your earlier work where you looked at the comprehensive plan or the capital budget, and just remind you that those plans have community engagement process around them. So you're not always starting from scratch. And then also the partnerships that you have when you've talked to your partners, internal partners, and they have relationships. So there may be a PTO or a teacher that's more active and has been doing something. Like, some of this community engagement and stakeholder engagement already exists. You aren't always starting from scratch. And you also need to make sure that you're paying attention to how the grant is the defining the community. So for instance, just a really quick one, low income is defined differently in federal grants, and where they want you to pull that data. So you might be able to use census data for that. But for instance, in the state grants that we've recently been seeing around schools, they're specifically asking for low-income student numbers from DESE, from your educational data set. So you also want to be careful that even if they've said it's this kind of community, that you're defining it the same way they are and you're pulling data in the same way they are. Okay. So I just wanted to share this next slide, which is this was the town of Lowell just did in 2025. They published their new Sustainable Lowell. And I just wanted to show you that they have written up this extensive community process that they engaged in. So if we ever go after a grant with Lowell and we're using, we're saying why we're doing something, like, we're not going to invent a community engagement process, right? We're going to use the fact that they did this. If they had 800 household telephone surveys conducted in, multiple languages, we get to use that. We don't invent a new community engagement process for every grant. I'm going to share that. Okay, so all of this has been up to this point really, like, how do you figure out the priorities? How do you figure out how to build those relationships? Because you're going to need all of that before you get into it. So now when I say build your grant toolbox, and we have, again, very detailed steps in the workbook, but all those plans and reports that you've just seen me go through and talk to you about, those are in your toolbox. So when I think of this toolbox, it's literally, a file folder. I'm digital these days, but it's a file folder, at least on your computer, that's your grant toolbox, and all of those plans are in there, and highlighted things that you found while going through those plans. You're going to have highlighted information that you may have pulled, pictures and other things. Also, when you're doing community outreach and engagement, I forgot to say this during the community and stakeholder engagement process, you're going to be called upon to do you're going to be doing outreach and engagement, or other members of your team are doing that around energy, and people will ask you things. Always remember to take pictures at those events, and try to collect pictures from your partners. As you're building that pipeline, there may come opportunities where you may have an assessment done of a building by a PEX vendor, or you may have a comprehensive building assessment. I'm not going to go into detail today about those, but there's more detail in the workbook about what I'm talking about there. But for every project that's become a priority project, you want all of these things really well coded in your grant toolbox, ready to go. The other things that I really want you to pay attention to is, you may find that other folks have written grant applications, or as you go through the virtuous cycle, every time you write a grant and you don't, whether you win it or not, you pop that in, because you're going to start using those over and over again. And also, a lot of these grant applications, you may start by going for money for design and engineering. You may come back to go for another piece. Some of these are complicated and multi-storied or stacked projects. So You keep all of these available, outreach and education events, take pictures. Once you've gone and searched for demographic information from whatever source, just keep it on hand. The picture I have here is from the cover of the Renew America Schools grant that Lowell did in fact win. And that grant application was a huge technical, multi-question, very specific. There wasn't a lot of room to put anything in other than data and details and exact responses. But one of the requirements was this front page, and we had to have the words that are on there. We had to have the submission title, the team name, and that this was our technical narrative. And what I love that we did was we stole the rest of the page to put pictures on it so that every reviewer who looked at this, even though they were going to have to look at all that tech, and they could see Lowell and Lowell's kids. So that's what having this toolbox and having those photos and all those things ready to go, when an opportunity comes up, you're going to be able to grab them fast and use them. All right, next slide. Oh, that went much more quickly than I thought. All right, so you've got your toolbox. Now we have arrived at, finally, right? You guys are all jonesing for the actual grant talk here. So now we're ready to see if we want to go for a grant. So a grant drops and you don't build the project for it, right? That was my first rule. Now what I want you to do is when the RFP or the NOFA or the PON, whatever they call it, the document that says this grant is available from this grantor, and it gives you all the rules of how to do it. There's a process that I go through immediately with clients that I think you should go through to evaluate the opportunity. The first and most important thing you want to do, there will be at least a paragraph, sometimes 3 pages, of how wonderful the organization that's offering the grant. That's not what you want to spend your time on. You want to go as fast as you can to who is eligible for this, right? Like, are you even an eligible entity? You don't want to learn anything else until you know, can I apply for this? And also like minimum requirements. So yes, a municipality is eligible, but you need to be able to save 80% of the greenhouse gases from the building, or you need to have 40% of the population you serve be low income by a specific metric. So it's both like literally that you will find a place where it says who's eligible, and that will usually be things like what kind of entity is eligible. You may have to search a little bit more through to figure out what minimum requirements are. The second thing that is a go, no go decision very early on is the deadline. If a grant hits your desk, no matter how much money it's for, if it's due this week, you are not applying for that grant unless you have already applied for the same concept multiple times and we can recycle it and get it in by the date. But that's a very unusual situation. So the deadline is the second, like, is this even realistic that we can do that? And then the third very quick go, no go decision in evaluating opportunity, is there a cost share or matching requirement? A lot of the regularly scheduled grant opportunities that we see out there will have a 10 to 30% required match. The city has to come in with that match. And now sometimes we get super lucky and if there are incentives on your project, that incentive, because it's not state money or federal money, it's can count as the match. So, sometimes there's some wiggle room, but, we found with a lot of communities, especially those, just a lot of communities, period, you just can't do that cost share unless you've been planning this for a while, right? So like if you're going to go in for MSBA in 2027, you now know, right? Like you're way in advance. So you're not going to be wondering about that cost share requirement when that drops in 2027. You will have been working on that. So, and there are things like, as we talked about in the early slides, if you know you have budget allocated in the capital plan, well, then maybe you can meet that. But if you don't, if none of those things are true and there's a big cost share, that's a go, no go decision. You're going to stop yourselves there and not spend a lot of time on this. Then the next level is, what will it fund? What types of projects and what can the funds be used for? And often, if you're looking at this, it probably does fund the things you want, but we have found often there will be things. The most common one is roofs. It won't fund roofs, but you can't do the project unless you get the roof fixed. So like that can be, if you can't fund, if you don't have the match already for the piece that they don't fund, you really have to make sure that the grant will let you do the work that you need to do, or that for what it won't can't what grant funds can't be used for, that you really have those great relationships with your budget office and your superintendent, and like, so how would we fill these? Is it realistic? Can we do the work we want and fill those? And then if we've made it all the way to this point, right, we want to look at the grant criteria and scoring. In federal grants, there's always a scoring matrix with like actual points, which I love. It makes my job so much easier. Um, and the grant criteria in a lot of state grants is not as strictly points, but they give you a sort of indication of how they're going to weight things. Um, So I always like to check that out and see if I'm gonna like, are we even gonna be in competition? And then the submission requirements, access. This is something that a lot of people don't check as early as I do. And I just really recommend you want to figure out how this thing actually gets uploaded and submitted, and look at that. Like what's the date that it needs to happen and what kind of system access and who has that access. Like, you just got to make sure you're going to be able to do that. And some of what you do when you build, like if you get to a go decision here, you're going to do that. The other thing that folks often forget to look at closely, that and this was particularly true around federal grants, I really wanted to talk people through this, is reporting requirements can be a killer. A lot of federal recordings, the way that the budget works, they are on a different uh, year than we are. And for some small communities, even if the money looked kind of good, the reporting requirements were more than that you could really commit to doing over time. So looking at what those reporting requirements, the long term after you win, what are you going to have to do? And can you really commit to doing that, is also a go, no go decision. So this is the process I go through with clients when we're looking at a grant opportunity for a project we already have, right? We don't invent projects for grants. We have projects. We look at grant opportunities and decide if we're going to be able to do it. So with that, I'm going to pause for a minute, and we want to walk you through this process with a real grant application. It's closed, but we think it's going to come again. Um, and show you sort of how we do this, and give you some practice with it. So Melissa, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, you can. So what Naomi and I created, and is also in your workbook, is a grant evaluation worksheet. And this is a high level go, no go decision making tool to help you decide, should I go for the grant? Should I not go for the grant? And what I've done is I've put in the chat a link to the Green School Works opportunity that was released last spring. And I would like everyone to take 5 minutes to look through that and see, can you answer these questions? And then we will go through that together. So we'll take about 4 or 5 minutes to do that. If you cannot access the link, either raise your hand, shout it out, or put something in the chat. And normally you'd spend a few more minutes reviewing it, but this again is just high level for the purposes of taking a look at this worksheet and how to use it. Does anyone need another minute or two, or are you ready to go through this together? Well, let me just go ahead and update my screen and we're going to go through this together. So when I take a look at the Green School Work walkthrough, the first thing I see on the cover page, because everyone see the opportunity on the left and the PowerPoint on the right? If you can't, either raise your hand or let me know. So I see in here that great, I see the proposals due April 30th at 11:59 p.m. And that's an important indicator as well. Is it due at 5 p.m.? Is it due at 11:59 p.m.? Because that actually does make a difference. But I also see that it was released on March 31st. So we're looking at a short turnaround time for this grant, a month. If you don't already have a project identified, it's going to be a fast turnaround time. As I scroll through this a little bit more, here's the summary. The first thing that pops out at me is $5 million. So I see that $5 million is available in funding. It's a lot of money to work on your schools. Feels really good. But I'm going to update that in just a minute. As I scroll through a little bit more, here's the paragraph Naomi was talking about Mass CEC. We can read about them later, wonderful organization, but that's not what we're looking for in this worksheet. We're going to scroll through, and right here where it says eligibility. First thing, it says school districts and municipalities. Great to know. But the other thing it shows me is that I have to have 40% low income in one of the past 3 years, according to the DESE data. I also have to affirm that the project site will remain in use for the next 20 years. So what's important about this is if I take a look, there's a link to the DESE data. One of the grants that we looked at after the fact that somebody else submitted required a specific data set for the grant. And the organization that submitted the grant used different data because they thought it made it look better. It was a federal grant. They automatically disqualified themselves by using the wrong data set. So it's important that you're using the right data set as well. The other thing I take a look at is the project impacting multiple schools. So if I want to use this up to $5 million for more than one school, every school that I'm submitting for has to meet that eligibility criteria. So those are some important indicators that I'm looking for in the grant. Questions about that so far? Did everyone find that when they were looking? Okay, so scrolling through as I'm reading and scanning, here's the eligible projects. This is going to be key. So I'm taking a look at what are some of the eligible projects. And I'm going to ask you guys, what are some projects that you found in there that you thought this would be great for my school? This would be great for my district. Did anyone find anything that they thought reading through this would be a good opportunity? I have a thumbs up. So one of the things that I think is important to point out here, lots of things were covered from this Green School Works grant: heat pumps, solar, electric vehicles, and ventilation systems, all really big projects. Some things that were covered with caveats were electrical system upgrades, building management, roof repair, and window. So while you could go after these, it does say they need to be part of a broader electrification project. Where that becomes important is we had a town that was looking for a new BMS system, and you cannot submit just for a BMS system. Was there something else that you could go after that was part of a broader electrification project in order to get that BMS system paid for? Same thing with roof and window replacements. You couldn't just submit $5 million for a roof. There had to be a larger project about decarbonization or energy efficiency. One thing to note in here that I also found under the projects, it does not cover ADA or fire compliance. So if you have an older building that needs an elevator, that's a big ticket item. If you can't cover that cost, this may not be the right grant for you. So knowing that that could be millions of dollars, making a note of that in the other notes, do I have a different school that has some of the same requirements, but does not need ADA compliance? Maybe it was built in 2002 instead of 1940. So as I'm scrolling through this, one of the other things that stood out to me is that we know that it's up to 5 million available. But as I look, if it's greater than $1 million, then I either need to have a plan or commit to a plan for decarbonization of the school. If I'm asking for more than $2.5 million, I have to have a 50% reduction at least in fossil fuel reduction. So these are some additional qualifiers. So at first you're reading, you thought you have $5 million, but really, if you want over $1 million, you need a little bit more. If you want 2.5 million, you have some additional criteria. Where this became important to us is we were working with a town that had $1.5 million project for BMS and some additional savings at their school. Because they had put in some new gas boilers 4 years ago, they did not want to commit to a decarbonization project. They were already working with the vendor. They already had a quote. They were able to go back to the vendor, rework the project so that it was under $1 million that made them eligible to apply for this grant. And as a side note, they won. So that's something to think about when you're taking a look at these projects. What are the additional qualifiers if I'm going for additional money? And as Naomi said, I think they're going to re-release Green Schoolwork, so that's something to keep in mind. As I'm scrolling through this application a little bit more, one of the things that stands out to me is the RFP should be submitted through email. I don't have to sign up for any system access. I don't have to make sure that I have access to the right permissions in order to submit it. It's going to be an email. So that works out. That's good news in my mind. But the other things it wants me to apply is I'm taking a look. It's asking me for authorized applicant signatures. I don't see anything about a letter of support, but it is asking for an applicant signature and acceptance form and team member resumes. So as I'm moving forward with this, one of the things that you'll want to make sure that you do early on is know what is the process for getting signatures in your town. And a case example is we spent a month working on the Green School Works application. We were told somebody could get the mayor's signature. On the day the grant was due, the signature was still not available. When that person went to the mayor's office, they were told it needed legal review, which would take 4 weeks. Well, we didn't have 4 weeks. The grant was due that day. Luckily, that individual had a very close relationship with the superintendent who could also be an authorized signer. They were able to go in, get that signature, and get that grant submitted on the day. But something like not knowing what your process is for getting those authorized signatures could end up making it so that you're not eligible to apply for the grant. And another thing, even though I didn't put it in the chart, is team member resumes. I can't tell you how many resumes we've written for facilities staff that don't have it. They'll sit down and talk to us, give us some highlights on what they do, and we create a resume for them or draft something up. So if you know you have to submit team member resumes, that's something early on to start gathering. I still don't see anything on cost, share, or match, but as I'm going through, I see here in the selection criteria. So now it's telling me what's the selection criteria. Student population served. It says in here, preference will be given to projects that benefit a higher percentage of low-income students. So what's important about this is if I have multiple buildings that I think could qualify for this grant, do I have one that has a higher percentage of low-income students? And if so, is that going to make me more competitive in this grant? Energy and fuel use, all of those things you'll dive into a little bit more as you move forward. Here are some of the other things, but as I'm looking through, it's telling me what are some of the things they're going to score and is it going to make me competitive? One of the things I find under the budget, it says, what are the other sources of funding and have they been secured? And do you have a plan to pay for anything that's unexpected? So although there's no cost share requirement, it's telling me that they're going to consider, do I have other skin in the game? So as I'm going through this grant evaluation worksheet, there are some things in there that are obvious, 40% low income, it gives me a specific date, but some things that I have to sort of read and understand, how is that going to be considered? And once you have this evaluation worksheet completed, then it tells you your go, no-go decision. You know whether or not you can start to move forward with this grant. Kind of a lot of information I threw at you. Does anybody have questions about this worksheet? If you have questions, pop them in the chat, or we'll have a chance for it later. So I'm going to turn it back over to Naomi.
Okay, I think we're going to turn it over to Shamika to do a learning check, right? Going to do another poll.
Yep. I will launch it for us here. So the question is, checking which one of these RFP, BON, grant notice element makes for a go, no-go decision before you invest in pursuing a grant application. We'll keep it open for 30 more seconds. Awesome. Almost all of you have it right. All of the above, Naomi and Melissa, is what majority put down.
We're very hard graded. All right, so let's move on. So once you've achieved the go, no go decision, and I'm just going to take one more second to say that it's always a hard conversation with folks when we have to say no, but you guys, you are invaluable people at making the world a better place, and your time is extremely limited. And I often think that the greatest gift we give to communities is when we get them to a no-go decision early, because then you haven't invested all this time in something that's just never going to work out for you. And also, sometimes going through that go, no go decision process sharpens the parts of your project. So, for instance, you may discover that you're just not ready for MSBA when it comes out, or for a GAP grant, which is for wastewater treatment facilities, because those are very technical and they're big, complicated projects. But you begin to see, oh, what do I need to do to be ready for the next opportunity? And you may have a chance to get comprehensive building assessments done, other studies done. So I just think that being prepared to go through that process and cut out early is hugely valuable. But in the great scenario where you've gone through that go no go decision, you have a real sense of the grant, and you've got a project that fits that grant. You're not inventing it. It's the right project for that grant. Then what I ask you to do next is answer the who, what, how, and budget in a bulleted format. And again, we have a worksheet for you to do this, but now you want to say, okay, I've got the go here. Let me say, okay, who exactly is applying? Is the school district applying? Is the municipality applying? Is which agent, who is it? Who are our partners on this team? Remember those people that you built as relationships with? Which of them are you pulling in now and are going to help make this happen? Who's the community that's going to be served, especially if it says, how are you going to serve this community? Like, who are my partners there? Like, bullet this out. And what exactly do I need to do there? So again, when you were building your project pipeline, maybe at this school, the thing that you need, because you've had a PEX vendor out or a municipal vendor out, you know exactly what you're going to replace. But maybe it's a site where you knew things were at end of life and you had a comprehensive building assessment done. And so you actually have a good sense of what you want to do, but you're going to need design and engineering. And depending on the grant, so you begin to sort of say, what is the next step in this? What is it that this grant will pay for? What's the project here? And you bullet that out. And you figure out, is there something I need? Do I need to, for instance, if this is a grant where the incentives are going to be valuable to me, do I need to be talking and getting an incentive quote? Or do I already have it? So what exactly is the project and what are the elements? Bullet that out. And how am I going to actually do that project? Like, who is going to make that happen? Um, what's the timeline for things to happen? With schools, we find that folks have to, like the grant may be due and you may get awarded in January. It doesn't matter. You're going to have to work over the summers because you have to work with the building, depending on the size and scope of the project, right? So, really understanding all of that. Um, and rough out a budget. Like, because maybe the grant gives you $5 million, but it turns out you want to do a ground source heat pump project and that costs $20 million. Is it worth going for a $5 million project when you're leaving $15 million the city, right? Like, so budget becomes important to make sure you can fit, or, the example that Melissa gave you of how sometimes the budget can sort of look a little bit with the criteria, I got to get under $1 million, or I gotta so do that, what I consider a bulleted one pager, um and go back again to the scoring criteria, to that one, to the go no go sheet, and especially to the scoring criteria, and recheck that you're still at a go. If you're still at a go, what I like to do at this point, you don't always have time to do at this point, is turn those bullets into a really short one pager about the project that allows you to call on your partners and say, hey, like, we have an opportunity to go on this. Are you in? Can you help me? And I would say that 9 out of 10 times we don't have time for the one pager. Like, we have a phone call. We bring all the partners in and we have the conversation and we just go with the bulleted list. But if you can make that one pager, it can be hugely valuable. And what you do with it is, next slide, please, is you build your grant plan with your team. And so that the build the initial project description is the process I just really talked to you about, the one pager, the bulleted. The next thing I always do is I look at that submission date and I back into it. So that when I'm talking with the team, I'm like, like if a CBA is due or something else, like, sorry, I shouldn't use acronyms. If there's something that you need, like you need the vendor to give you the data and they need to go out to the site and they look at it, and whether that's an assessment from a vendor or whether it's a comprehensive building assessment, those at a minimum are going to take 4 weeks. So depending on where I am, if I already have one, or we've had this happen quite a bit, which is that folks have got a CBA in process and then this drops, and so we need to like see, will we have the study completed? Like, will we have data, or can the person doing that assessment talk with us so that we have, a good budget estimate before we go forward? So I work back from the submission date to know when I'm going to need everything. Also, we're going to build the that submission date. I also check who's submitting and if they're on. We have had people, like, when we do this, they go and they check the person who has to do the submission, and the person's going to be on vacation that week. So, like, we schedule submission earlier than the due date because we know we need to. So just that submission date becomes really important. You build the technical and project team with that initial description. You're going to know some of the folks you need, and then you're going to keep bringing folks in. We've found that, like, each partner knows the next partner that you need for it, so that can be super helpful. And you tend to be doing this pretty quickly. Again, to the extent that that grant toolbox has ready to go stuff in it, like, that makes this whole process much smoother. Um, you want to make sure not just the grant team who's actively pursuing the project, but if you have partners like a community organization who regularly does education, or that teacher who's been doing science projects, like, you want to make sure that you have connected to those folks. And if you require a letter of support, you have it. If you don't need a letter of support, but you can get one and they'll take it, you can get it. And again, you start, going through that toolbox, finding the photos, finding the text from prior grants that can help populate and make this a compelling story. Now, obviously, every grant opportunity is slightly different in what you can and can't do, and whether you have to answer the questions exactly, like, that is the number one thing, is you will always have to answer all of the questions in the format that they ask you to. So some of these things are going to flex a little depending on the specific grant, and these advanced notice and scheduling approvals, like that's going to be very specific to each grant, and so is supporting documentation and attachments, and you'll be surprised at how much time those take. So again, build that into, it's not just the writing the grant, but like, does everything at the end of the day need to have a certain file name? Melissa said she loves, when you can just upload an email. That sounds really good. Often there's a file naming convention, and there are other things you can upload with it. So like, you need to know that you need to get everything ready in that way. And if they're asking you for your MEI data, or they're asking you for any particular thing and they want you to upload it, you want to make sure that you are gathering those and attaching them, again, specific to the grant opportunity. This is also, you build the grant game plan, but as you're going through it with the technical partners, you're going to be continuously improving that project as you write the narrative and figuring out if you can add things that make you competitive. Don't add things that add costs. Be careful just to become competitive. Like, you always have to be balancing that. But sometimes I'd actually say almost always, as we have those conversations with the team, starting with that one pager, and we keep going and we're like, we need these points, we need these points. Folks will be like, oh, would this help? And you learn like a whole new thing that can sharpen your project, and help you to get through. Um, so this is the game plan, and now there is the narrative itself. So if we can go to the next page, just a word about, before I start talking about the narratives. Again, every application is different. I'm used to having a lot of room to tell a story in a narrative. And I have to say that this year, a lot of the applications I've been working on have no room to tell your story as one coherent story. They have very specific questions and very, like very short answers. So you always have to answer the questions, and make sure you're giving them the data that they want. But what makes the difference between an application that's hitting the points, which is important, and you have to hit all the points, and an application that's winning, is the story you're able to tell, the way you're willing to pull folks in. One of the things I've said to many, many folks we work with is, your first paragraph or your pitch, if you can win the reviewer at that point and win them emotionally, they're going to want to give you the points when they get to the section. You still have to have the right information to get the points, but they're going to want to see it because they love the project. And so when I talk about that story that you're telling, it is always about the people. People want to fund people. People want to see good things happen in the world. So that story is that story of why this project matters to your community. It's not that you're going from 85% efficient boiler to a 95% efficient boiler. It's that the kids in those rooms are going to be warm in the winter, right? Like, it's got to be about how this is transforming the experience of real people. And so all of those pain points that you pulled when you were talking to your partners, they become really important ways to frame why this is so important. It is also really critical that you tell, as this story, the hero's journey, right? Like, here are all these things that are hard, and here is the vision. Like, if you fund us, if we go from 85% to 95% efficient, or from dirty fossil fuel to clean electric, we're going to like save the district money, which can be spent on, students. We're going to have cleaner air. We're going to have a better learning environment, improved, resilience at the schools. Sometimes, a lot of schools we hear, a lot of buildings in general, have no cooling because we were built for a different climate. And so people are having really hard problems with whether they can keep the school running in the early fall and late spring. So all these things, and then, we've also had places where there's a community building where the community has been looking for community space for years. Like there's just no place for people to meet. And like we know that from past grants and things. So we can talk about the renovation of a community space as expanding that. Those are all like that positive vision becomes really important to talk about how this is really changing, taking things that were really bad, that were hurting your community, and making them good. So I think that the easiest way to really, and again, you will be having to tell this story sometimes in like little short answers. Sometimes you get a whole narrative to tell, sometimes you don't. So I want to give you an example from a recent, because you guys just went through the Green School Works application during that phase. So next slide. In that past phase, this was one of those grant applications where the narrative section was almost completely technical. Like the questions we had to answer were so technical. It was hard to like win the hearts and minds, but they gave us this one short answer, which was like, what's your project pitch? And this was our friends in Quincy just packed it in. Yes, we had to give the low income number, but here's how they were like, we are a Title I school in an environmental justice census tract, serving a student population that is 73.9% low income. So they were checking that box, but they went further. They had gotten that data, right? So they were 89.2% high needs, 49.2% with disabilities. And then they go on. The school is in an isolated location at the end of a peninsula, adjacent to 918 units of public housing, vulnerable to coastal flooding and extreme heat. The community has faced a long history of exposure to industrial pollution from the neighboring Four River designated port area. And then they hit the high points, right? This project will support the complete electrification of the Snug Harbor School with air source heat pumps and ERVs, achieving 81% fossil fuel reductions, 79% greenhouse gas reductions with the project period. The project will enable full electrification, increase resiliency, improve indoor air and outdoor air quality, and greatly improve the learning environments for students and teachers. And then they just keep pushing it, right? Like, and this project is going to be highly replicable for school districts. We're braiding funding and we're phasing implementation to allow the schools to remain operable while rapidly transitioning to this healthier, resilient, energy efficient, fossil-free fuel schools. So I'm hoping that like when they read that, they're like, boy, do we want this project. And, we still had to win all of the projects. And they did win. And that this was actually the site that they chose to do the press announcement for all of the winners. And this school did also braid in a tremendous amount. The city came forward with a lot of additional funding for ADA and other things. So it's a beautiful project, but I think they really also nailed the story of why this was good. All right. So I think that brings us to, I have one more slide, I think, just to tell you some opportunities that we think should be on your horizon. Although things come out of left field all the time, you probably are pretty familiar with the Green Communities, DOER's Green Communities Competitive Grants and the Green Communities Decarbonization Grants. Mass CEC has a number of grants that we've worked with communities on. The Empower Capacity and Implementation. These, you do need a community-based partner, but they can be really valuable, both to organize a project team, especially with community, if there's a real community piece to it. And the implementation projects, often a step that we have found really hard for communities to get funding for is to get some design work or some engineering studies. And these are relatively small grants, but they can, if the communities come together and decided on a project it wants, those grants can sometimes help us get to that next stage of a design or engineering funding. The workforce development grants, Green School Works, it has been whispered in our ear, not whispered, it has been shouted at conferences that that will drop again. There will be another $20 million. We don't know if it will look exactly like the last round. We've heard there are going to be some differences, but that's going to drop sometime soon. Some other ones we just listed there. What they're coming up for, the MSBA, ARP, when you have those end of life, or you're starting to pay attention to your end of life boilers and heating systems, you should be thinking, you should be plotting towards that 2027 date if you can. All right, so I'm gonna stop there and take questions. And I always like to prime my audience. I want you to think about, even if you don't tell me, after going through this, what are you going to do next? What's your next step? Where are you confused? That one you should talk to me about. And do you have a sense of what opportunities you now want to focus on? All right. So should we take questions?
Thanks so much, Naomi and Melissa. That was a great presentation. We have one question in the chat. Scott, I don't know if you want me to read it or if you want to just come off mute and ask your question.
Sure, thank you. I was just wondering if anybody's had much experience with this revolving fund concept. We keep running into things where there's the long town meeting process means it can be more than a year before you get to actually have funding. And the recent DEP grant for GAP 4 was a good indicator of the fact that it took only a 10% contribution, but it had certain limiting elements to that. So has anybody had much experience with that, about using that? What we found is there is an MSGL, a sort of law that you could apply and then do seed funding in front of it for the first year, just if anybody's had experience on that.
Maybe we don't need to share this slide and we can see each other. Can we drop the slides and just see each other again? So I can tell you my experience, and this might be something that the MESM Academy should do. My experience has been that many of the communities I work with have done whatever they need to do to have that revolving fund. So they are already putting their energy. It doesn't go. So I know that there are communities where when an incentive check comes in, it goes into the general fund. That's the way the law works. But there is many of your fellow communities have done whatever process is needed to be done in order to have that revolving loan fund. So they are able to allocate, when they get an incentive dollar into it goes and they can respend that. And those dollars are city dollars that can be used as match. So I don't know if Julia, if that's something that MAPC has like some training on or could have training on for those who aren't there yet. The other thing, and again, this isn't for all of you because some of you are served by a different utility or you have a municipal utility as your electric, but so this is really limited, and maybe there are National Grid and Eversource folks on the phone. They can tell me who it's limited to, but I know that with many of my National Grid clients, if they're served by National Grid Electric, that they can use solar credits. They have on-bill financing. I'm not sure if Eversource does. I'm not sure if you have a municipal light plant, you can do this. In fact, I think you can't on a municipal light plant, but excess solar credits have become a funding source, and then on-bill repayment has just become a way of doing the match, especially if you're going to have good savings. Because then, like, if you're going to save the money, then your partners and facilities don't mind because the bill's staying the same. It's just paying off that investment. So those are the two. I'm just wondering, out to the audience and to the other partners on the call, does anybody else have a better answer for this, or more of an answer from their own experience? Kai, is that?
I do not have an answer. I have a follow-up question to that same topic, which is whether you are aware of any cases in which net metering credits have been used as a match for state grants, not for utility projects, but for state grants.
I think those net metering credits, I think the answer is yes. That if you have an excess of solar credits, that's what you're saying, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yes. In National Grid territory, we have used those. We have shown those as match. Because it's basically your money, right? It's basically the city's money. It's just a credit that you're applying to a specific project. And I think the reason that it works in National Grid territory is because they have the on-bill financing. So like there's a easy way to apply it. But I'm not sure, like, when you get into the deep details, I think depending on who your utility sponsor is, this is a conversation that you want to get really clear on.
Yeah. I would suggest if you've got, it's Lori from National Grid, if you've got specific projects you're working on, that you talk to your energy efficiency rep. And also, I think it's, when you say match, it may be grant by grant dependent. Like I would say MSBA has a different definition of what the match is. The city or town has to actually get approval for those matching funds. That's kind of a different level of commitment than just having a potential on-bill repayment, available from a project. So I would dig into this when you've got a specific example, and we can see if it looks like a good fit, right, for a specific grant.
And I also
Yeah,
want to
and
make sure to highlight Jennifer's comment in
yeah,
the chat as well, because Eversource is
yeah.
slightly different.
Jennifer, do you want to pop on screen and share that?
Sure. So Eversource does have a financing offer. It comes out in a separate bill. So you get the bill at the same time, it comes in the same envelope. It's a separate account and it's a separate bill. And I'm not sure if we have the ability to transfer solar credits like National Grid does. It's not something that we have done in the past for energy efficiency projects, but it's something that I am trying to follow up on and find out if that's something that we could do, because I know that National Grid customers really like that ability. And so at this time, I'm not sure if it's something we can do, but I do want to look into it. So if you have a particular situation where you think that you have like eligibility for that, you have a surplus of those solar credits, definitely follow up with your specific rep, and we will work internally to see if that is possibly something we could do.
Thanks, Jennifer. And Scott, before we go back to you, I want to also highlight Amelia's question in the chat. Amelia, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I'm wondering that when we're trying to apply for grants, often you need a document like an energy audit done in advance in order to do it. But I don't want to go out of my way to get energy audits for all of these places when that information could expire by the time that I do have a grant come around that I would be able to, if I'm doing it 1 year and then the next year the grant becomes available, I can't use that, information again. So I'm just wondering, like, is there a particular strategy for getting ready for grants to come online and not, wasting resources in doing so?
Yes, you're not wasting resources. This is why I told you this. So I didn't explain it clearly enough, but when you start working the workbook, you're going to see this. So it is never a waste of time. Your first move is to look at your priorities. What is the community priorities? So if you have a building that has very high usage, you want to get that assessment done because it's a priority for you, not because there's going to be a grant. You get that assessment done because that's high on the list for whatever grant drops, your highest use building or your critical use building or the building where you're going to have failures. You want to get that assessment done. The choice of whether you're going to have, and I think there's another training coming up, which I really want you to go to around the offerings that MassSave has. But whether you're going to have a vendor, PEX vendor or municipal vendor, depending on who your utility supplier is, but that process, I would get those assessments and I would not worry very much about their being out of date, because those are the things we can do. They're generally under $350,000. Lori's going to have to tell me if I'm getting it wrong. But like, those are things you want to do and you want that information. You do not want to wait for a grant to drop, and you don't need to worry about like, these are your priority projects. The comprehensive building assessments I have worked with now are amazing. And those are for your highest priority projects, especially places where you're going to have failures. I would just, again, set your prioritization. Do not go after grant. Like, I would say absolutely now, anything that is in your top 5 buildings, because they are a priority for any of those reasons we talked about at the beginning of this, get those assessments done. You know what we had, I'll give you a really great example of this, is when the federal money was flowing for small communities, the state got the EECBG grant. Like there was money for, based on your population for larger communities. And that was a whole nother thing. But when the state put it out, the communities that had vendors, even though they weren't moving forward with those projects, it was like a very fast turnaround, but they all had those vendor assessments and they got to pick things off that list, and they knew the teams at the utilities came out really fast with like what the incentive would be, and like they put it together. It was an amazing thing. It was a month, I think, and there it was. So if I could say, like, this is rule number 2, don't wait to find out that there's a grant. Get your assessment, figure out what your highest priority projects are, start getting the assessments done. You don't know when that grant's going to come, and we can always do it again if it's 3 years later, but you need that information so that you are ready because we will not know what's going to hit when. Go now.
Mhm.
And Amelia, I would add to that what Naomi said. She's totally spot on. Doing this upfront is the right thing to do. I would also say run those projects through your utility rep so you have an offer letter in hand, because if you wait to the last minute, sometimes a project that you thought was going to be easy to get an offer letter for incentives on ends up needing to run custom, and it takes longer than you thought to get that information. And once you have your packet of like, here's my projects and here's the offer letters that go with them, you may find when the grant does come out that you can actually do more than you thought you could, because you have all this utility mass save funding that helps your more projects actually make it onto a grant table. So I totally agree. And I think it also will help you with figuring out where you want to do your comprehensive building assessments, where you actually want to have a project expediter come out and quote things for you. Like they're two different things. One's going to give you a higher level estimate. One's going to give you, this is what it actually costs to do a project. And sometimes you need that granular detail that a vendor can give you about a project. So, and it's also more eyes on your projects, right? Like it's going to be more people visiting your buildings. They may find things that you didn't notice before, like they haven't shown up as being problematic for your facility staff, but when the vendor comes in, they're like, that transformer is pretty old and you could save a lot of energy if you replaced it. Like they're not going to notice a transformer until it breaks, right? Like I'm just picking that one up as an example. So it's always good to have the people out. It's always good to run the projects with your energy efficiency representative, so that you've got really good sense. And sometimes, projects have promotions associated with them. Sometimes you can, make your funds go further. So really good idea.
Okay, thank you so much.
Julia, do we have any final questions, or do we need to give people time to do an evaluation? We are more than happy when you, as a group, I know you're going to meet again and talk amongst yourselves. Like if there's a list of questions that come out of that, Julia will get in touch with us and we'll try to, give feedback. And also the workbook. Like when you forget whatever I said, or if I got it wrong, the workbook will have all of your answers, or many of them, and your utility partners and your MESM partners. All great resources.
Really appreciate that offer. Naomi and maybe Scott, I see your hand up. If you want to put your question in the chat and we can follow up with Naomi's team as she just mentioned, and we'll pass it over to Samiksha to close us out. And yes, please do the evaluation form.
Awesome. Thank you. Really quickly. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Naomi. I did just put the evaluation form in the chat. Please do fill that out. It's really helpful to hear what you liked, what you didn't like, and to make sure that these trainings are in alignment with your needs. We have exciting things coming up. We have the Working in a Municipal Government 101 training session on the 13th of November. And I really want to highlight the PLN grant writing debrief. This session will have guided discussion, kind of a following up on today's training. So please do come prepared to share experiences and to share your experiences with others, as well as if you have any questions, to share them as well. And then we also have the Building Decarbonization Strategies training on the 2nd of December. But thank you for joining us today. Please do fill out the evaluation form. Thank you. Oop, that is an 11 p.m. We're not having a training at 11 p.m. Definitely 11 a.m.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.